The story of Amelia Crow, later known as the Red Dress Witch, began in a forgotten corner of New England during the mid-1800s. The village was isolated, surrounded by dense forests that stretched for miles, cloaked in mist and mystery. The townsfolk lived simple, quiet lives, but the shadow of superstition was never far behind. In those days, the line between medicine and witchcraft was thin, and the fear of the unknown often turned into something much darker. Amelia Crow arrived one cold, fog-choked autumn, setting up her modest home at the edge of the forest. She was a striking woman, tall with dark hair that tumbled down her back like a river of black silk. Unlike the other women of the village, who dressed in plain, earth-toned clothing, Amelia wore a vivid red gown, even during the drab winter months. The fabric shimmered as if soaked in blood, and it made her stand out like a flame in the dark woods. The villagers were wary of her from the beginning. Rumors spread like wildfire. She was a runaway bride, a widow of a sea captain lost to the ocean, or a foreigner fleeing some terrible past. But what unsettled them most was her uncanny knowledge of herbal remedies and healing. While many whispered about her strange powers, they still came to her cottage when sickness struck or when a child fell ill with fever. Amelia never refused anyone. She would greet them with a gentle smile, her eyes sharp and knowing, like she could see right into their souls. Her cottage was filled with dried herbs hanging from the rafters, bottles of strange liquids lining the shelves, and an ever-present scent of earth and smoke. For a time, her skills made her invaluable, even if the villagers spoke about her in hushed, suspicious tones once they left her doorstep. But things took a sinister turn during one particularly harsh winter. The air was colder than it had been in decades, and a sickness began to spread through the village, a fever that burned bright and fast, taking the lives of the young and old alike. The small cemetery filled quickly, and the villagers grew desperate. They begged Amelia for help, and she did what she could, brewing potions and teas, mixing salves, and staying up nights to tend to the sick. Despite her efforts, the death toll continued to rise. Grief turned into fear, and fear quickly morphed into anger. It was easier to blame the strange woman in the red dress than to accept the randomness of the plague. Murmurs of witchcraft began to grow louder. The village priest, a stern man with a voice like thunder, declared that the sickness was a curse brought upon them by Amelia's dark magic. One night, under a full moon that hung low and bright like a bloodshot eye, the villagers gathered outside the church. They carried torches, their flames flickering in the cold wind, casting long, twisted shadows on the cobblestone streets. The priest led them, chanting prayers of protection, his face contorted with righteous fury. They stormed to Amelia's cottage, a mob fueled by grief and superstition. She stood at her door, her red dress glowing in the moonlight. Looking like she was bathed in blood, her face was calm, almost serene, as if she knew this moment had been coming all along. When they demanded that she confess to witchcraft, she simply shook her head, her dark hair swirling around her like smoke. "I am no witch," she said softly, her voice carrying over the crowd. "I tried to help you, but the villagers wouldn't listen." The priest raised his torch and pointed at her, his voice booming. "The devil wears red to mock the blood of Christ. She is a servant of darkness, and she has cursed our children." With that, the mob surged forward, dragging her from her home. They tied her hands and dragged her to the town square, where they had piled wood and kindling in a makeshift pyre. The flames licked the sky, casting an eerie light on the faces of the villagers, twisted with hatred and fear. As they tied her to the stake, Amelia's red dress fluttered in the wind, almost as if it were alive. The villagers spat at her feet and hurled stones. The priest approached her one last time, offering her a chance to repent, but she only looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes and smiled a small, sad smile. "You cannot kill me," she whispered. "You think fire will rid you of me? This village will drown in blood for what you have done." The priest stepped back, shaken by her words, but he raised his torch high and set the pyre alight. The fire roared to life, engulfing Amelia in an instant. Her screams were drowned out by the crackling of the flames, but some say they heard her laughter mixed in with the wails. As the smoke rose, her figure became a shadow, her red dress the last thing visible before she was swallowed entirely by the blaze. The villagers cheered, believing they had rid themselves of the witch. But as the flames died down, the wind shifted, carrying a strange, metallic scent, like the sharp tang of blood, through the village. That night, every villager who had laid a hand on Amelia awoke from a nightmare, clutching at their chest, as if they'd been burned. The next morning, a thick, unnatural fog rolled in from the forest, blanketing the village. And from the depths of the woods, a soft, whispering voice could be heard, Amelia's voice, promising vengeance. It was then that the first child disappeared, the only trace left behind being a small torn piece of red fabric stained with ash and smelling of smoke. From that day on, the legend of the Red Dress Witch was born, and the villagers would come to learn that some curses do not die in the flames. They are only forged stronger